I absolutely love it when somebody comes out with a new product that just changes the way people do things. I love it even more when that product is going to better the archery community and when that product is going to make it easier for people to work on their own stuff at home. I introduced you to the MODSAW. Now, I haven't got to play with one of these on my own yet, but I've talked to a lot of friends and I've talked to a lot of guys that have seen them, and they absolutely rave about them. What I can tell you is that I love it that they've made an option that makes it more affordable, more compact for people to build and work on their arrows at home. I have oftentimes said, and I've talked about it a lot, it's very cost effective to build your own arrows at home. You can buy a saw and you can buy a square and you can buy a spinner and you can buy all that stuff for relatively cheap. But these guys have come out with an all-in-one solution, and it's cheaper than most saws out there for just the saw. So guys, I would highly encourage you to check out MODSAW, because I just love guys that are trying to make it better for people, for everyday guys like me and you, to build arrows at home and to work on their stuff at home. This is incredibly well priced. So well priced that I questioned if it would actually work or not. But I've talked to a lot of guys and they say it's mind-blowing. So guys, I would highly encourage you to check out the MODSAW. I've got with me Jonathan and Ryan, the co-owners of MODSAW, the brains behind it, the vision behind it, and just the development behind it. We cover all of that. And then we cover just the process to build you some better arrows, some steps to take to ensure you're going to get the best arrow build that you can possibly get. Guys, I hope you enjoy the episode. As always, this episode is brought to you by our good friends over at ScentLock. Let's dive in.
With over 90 years of innovation, Bear Archery continues pushing toward the goal of founder Fred Bear, making archery accessible for all. Fred believed the history of the bow and arrow were the history of mankind, and everyone should immerse themselves in the outdoor experience. Welcome to the Bear Archery Podcast, where the mission is simple: to hunt, grow, and inspire others.
Guys, when it comes to hunting and being outdoors, I believe there's one product that I use more than anything. That's not my bow. That's not my boots. It's not my anything else other than a binocular harness. If I am outside doing anything outdoors, I've got a binocular harness on. Whether I'm shooting, whether I'm hanging tree stands, whether I'm out hiking, it doesn't matter. If I'm outdoors doing just about anything, I've always got my binocular harness. Alaskan Guide Creations does it, and does it very, very well. I've been using these now for about 8 years, and I absolutely love them. The new system with all the magnets are really good, really accessible, very customizable. Guys, if you're in the market for a new binocular harness, I would highly, highly, highly encourage you to check out Alaskan Guide Creations, because they are phenomenal. All right, gentlemen. So before we jump into this, we're going to be kind of diving into building better arrows. I'm an arrow junkie. I love all things arrows and building arrows. And so whenever I see a product like this, I want to talk to you guys. So before we jump into arrow building, give me an introduction to yourself and MODSAW and how this all came about.
Yeah, sure. So I'm Jonathan. This is me and my brother-in-law, and we came up with MODSAW down here in Texas when Ryan, arrow building, getting into tinkering, decided that he wanted to get a saw. Couldn't find one exactly like what he wanted. So with my software engineer background, reached out to me, and that's sort of where it all started. Just a quick couple conversations, and then it was ahead of us.
Now, I love young startups, but I also love products that change the game, that change the way that people do things. Because like I said, I'm an arrow junkie, and what I do in my free time is build arrows. That's what I like to do. And many of the listeners know I'm currently building a shop out back, which I'm incredibly excited about. But even still, I don't want to take up a bunch of space with a saw and a square and a spinner. And so if you can combine them all into two, and we talked on the phone, and I was just saying, that takes up less space than just my saw. And if you're watching on Carbon TV or watching on YouTube, then you can actually see, and they're going to walk us through it. So I would highly recommend flip over to Carbon TV and or Bear Archery's YouTube so you can watch the video. But that takes up less space than just my current saw, much less my saw, my square, and my spinner. And so I love products that just come about and change the way that people do things. So kudos to you guys, man, because I have talked to several people that's played with it. I haven't got to play with one yet, but I've talked to several people that's played with it, and they've been very impressed. Talked to several people that saw it at Total Archery Challenge Texas, and they were very impressed. And so kudos to you guys, man, because I believe you guys have made a winner here. So walk me through kind of how it works and what all you guys have there.
Yeah, sure. So I'll go over real quick, just like what the components are, and then we'll jump over to Ryan. He'll actually sort of show you how to use it. So starting off back here, hopefully you can see this pretty good. So we have a diamond coated saw blade here. So on this side of the unit is where you cut your arrows. So we have a laser engraved measurement system here. And this one's set up for carbon to carbon, and we can talk a little bit more about some additional options for if you like to cut with your knock-in. So basically, rear rest helps you set what length you want to cut the arrow. Mid rest, prevent flex whenever you're cutting your arrow. And then on this other side here, we have your spinner. And right here, we have a squaring post. So you can see the tan there. That's your sandpaper. And that's what you'll use to square up the end of that cut if needed after you cut it.
I really like that you guys have a center post on your saw because,
yeah.
And we're going to get into the importance of squaring your arrows in the first place. But a lot of guys, well, most saws don't have that first and foremost. And so this is going to give you a cleaner cut to begin with. So it makes the squaring portion even quicker, easier, and more effective. So, now, when you guys went to design this, what was it that stood out to you guys as far as like, okay, we want this, in our arrow building process, this has never been available to us. So we really want this.
Yeah, I would say, a lot of saws, they have this or that, but they don't sort of have it all. So we would run into some, that was the next thing I was going to point out is we have a vacuum adapter to catch that carbon dust. So if you find a saw that has a vacuum adapter, well, maybe it doesn't have another thing, or
I've got a small thing that we did that, as far as we know, no one else has done, and it was something that I personally did building arrows. But what we call the wobble indicator, which is right here. Now, as you know, when you spin your arrows, sometimes it's hard to see that tip of that arrow if you have wobble, especially if you're on a darker desk or something like that. So what I would do is I would put a Sharpie dot on my workbench, and eventually I had a bunch of different dots because I would move it everywhere. But essentially it's just a point of reference for when you're spinning that arrow to look down and see if your broadhead tip is wiggling off of that. What we have here is a line. So something as small as that, it's a white background so that, like I said, if you're on a black bench or something dark and you've had a dark broadhead, or vice versa, you've got a light bench and a light broadhead. We've got this here wobble indicator so that you can move this up and down and just hold that right under for a point of reference for the tip of your broadhead.
Brilliant. You guys are just geniuses. I'm just going to go ahead and say that. I've never even thought of that because call me stupid, I guess. But I'm always, you spin them and you're trying to look and you'll, move your head down and over and up and just see if you can see any wobble. And so that's a brilliant tip. Even in and of itself. So kudos to you guys, man. It really seems like you thought of everything. So, does it have any trouble? And not that I'm trying to pick your saw apart. No, does it have any trouble with like full metal jackets or aluminum arrows or anything like that?
So, no, that's one of the first things we thought of when we made this saw is, hey, can it cut FMJs? Can it cut 250 spine FMJs, And so we finally got a hands on some, and we also sent a saw out to a shop that was cutting a lot of arrows and said, hey, put it through the test, and they did. And excellent feedback. I mean, they said it was cutting it like butter, cutting it better than other saws that they had used in the past. And so we've had no issues with that. And with that, the blade, being the diamond coated blade, they're seeing little to no wear still, even with cutting those stronger arrows. So
that's what you guys did a video of cutting an arrow, like what, 3,000 times? It was like 3,000 cuts, something like that. Something just ungodly.
That was 300. And
300 still.
It it took a little while to do that. Surprisingly, I think 300 cuts in a row.
Yeah,
we initially wanted to do more, but I was like, man, this is like 30 minutes of cutting straight in real time. So yeah, we did that, and little to nowhere at all. So that's why we chose the blade.
And really, for your everyday guy who's building arrows, and even myself, I build a ton of arrows in a year. I mean, I probably build, I don't know, probably a dozen a week. So we'll say 52 dozen.
Yeah.
Well, 52 times 12. I mean, that's still only, that's 624 cuts in a year. And you guys did it in what, 30 minutes, you said?
30
so
minutes.
624 cuts in a year. And that's building a ton of arrows. I mean, most dudes are going to build 2 dozen in a year, maybe. They're going to build their dozen. Maybe they go to attack and they build a couple more dozen. So 3 dozen maybe in a year. I'm building, and a dozen a year, that's probably, or a dozen a week, that's probably even a high estimate, but we'll say a dozen every 2 weeks. So a dozen every 2 weeks, I'm only cutting in a year what you guys cut in 30 minutes, and your saw blade held up. And I've talked to so many dudes, so many guys, and Dave from Bowhunter Planet was the first one to just rave about the saw. I hate Dave because he makes me spend money. Like he'll call me and be like, dude, have you seen this? You need to buy this. And I'm like, all right, Dave, whatever. I buy it. But so Dave was the first one to call me. He's like, man, this saw is dope, dude. And then you talk to guys from Texas. And I think after we talked, Jonathan, I called a couple friends. I'm like, hey, did you stop by the booth? And 2 of them it said, dude, it's whisper quiet. And it cuts like butter. And I'm like, well, that's what I need then. Cause I was sharing with Jonathan, when I turn my saw on, the whole room just shakes out of its core. I mean, it's like everything's falling off the shelves and everything's moving. And now I do have a vacuum adapter on my saw. However, let me ask, how did you guys set that up? Because the one that's on mine just sucks. Like it takes way too long to hook a hose up, and it's more hassle than to even use it. So then my whole room just gets dusty. So how does your guys' vacuum hose work exactly?
Yeah. So on this side here, the saw comes stock to fit the inner diameter of 1 1/4 inch shop vac hose. And it just slides over this. Additionally, in the baggie, we'll send out an adapter for your 1 3/4 inch shop vac hose. And basically all that this is going to do is you put your shop vac over this.
Yeah.
And this is fit to just slide on here. So That's really all there is to it. And it's a pretty tight fit, so it's not going to pull your saw off the table or, come out of your shop vac while you're cutting.
Man, you guys thought of everything.
Well,
absolutely
a lot of
everything.
this came from customer feedback too. I will say, whenever we first launched this, people kept asking like, hey, will this cut aluminum arrows? Will this cut FMJs? And to be honest, we were like, I don't know. Let's go test it.
Try it.
So we've had a really close relationship with a lot of our customers where, they'll ask for stuff. Like we can go into cutting with your nocks in. Like we said, we sent this saw out to a shop who was cutting, at least 12 dozen arrows a day. They're pulling the knock out of every single arrow. We didn't think about that as hobbyists because we're cutting a dozen arrows. It's no big deal. So we came up with a solution for them, and they love it. It's working great. And now we have another thing to offer to our customers.
That's awesome, guys. No, really. And I said it once, but kudos to you guys. I mean, you guys truly thought of everything. And I love people that that want to better the archery industry. I love that. And that's why I'm so incredibly passionate. I don't know who I was texting, but the guys over at Paper Tuner, I believe that they did this really well. They thought of something, and, especially for home guys that are building arrows at home. I mean, if you have a Paper Tuner, it takes up half your stinking garage. And so they thought of something. You guys thought of something. I just love people that want to better the archery community and better people building their own stuff at home. I'm all for people building their own stuff at home, people working on their own stuff at home in a safe manner. Let me say that. We did a full series not too long ago with PJ Riley from Lancaster, and he taught you step by step how to build your own bows. And that was the biggest feedback we got, was like, yeah, but bows, people are going to kill themselves. I'm all for safety. Let me just say that first and foremost. But I'm also for guys learning their equipment and being able to work on it in their own homes.
Yeah.
And so, man, really kudos to you guys for thinking of a way that can better people working on their own equipment in their own homes. Guys, I am a big believer in custom built aftermarket strings. Basically, the moment I pull my bow out of the box, whether it's a new compound, a new recurve, a new longbow, I'm going to be putting a custom built aftermarket string on that bow. At Dominant Strands, they're going to be using high quality fibers from BCY, like a low wax 452X. The low wax content and the special way that they pre-stress and pre-stretch those strings and cables make for a very, very stable set of strings. They're going to last longer and they're going to shoot better. There's going to be very little peep rotation. There's going to be very little stretch over time. You are going to be a lot happier in the long term. You're just going to have a lot better shooting experience when you upgrade those strings to an aftermarket custom built set of strings. Plus, you can customize them any way you want. Now, I'm also a huge believer in custom built strings for a longbow or recurve. Why? Because coming from the factory, they're not going to be using the highest quality materials. They're not going to be pre-stretching those strings over long periods of time. Whereas, again, if I call up Dominant Strands, they're going to build the best set of strings for that bow. I'm going to walk them through what I want out of that string, what I want out of that bow, and they're going to build a set of strings exactly to spec out of the best materials for that bow. Guys, a custom set, the best string you could ever buy for your recurve or longbow, is going to cost you about $30. That is the most bang for your buck that you can get when upgrading your longbow or recurve. You're going to get an incredible shooting experience upgrade for just $30. So I encourage everybody, the moment that recurve or longbow comes out of the box, upgrade it to a custom built string. Guys, the people over at Dominant Strands, they are unmatched when it comes to their customer service. You're going to call them up. You're going to talk to your string builder, the guy that's going to be building your strings. He's going to ask you what you're looking to get out of the bow. He's going to ask you about your bow. He's going to ask you about your nocks. He's going to ask you everything about your bow setup so he can build you the best set of strings for your bow. Guys, I would highly encourage everybody, no matter the bow, no matter the manufacturer, to consider upgrading your strings to a nice set of custom built aftermarket strings. My boys over at Dominant Strands, they do it, and they do it very, very well. Their turnaround time is incredible. Their attention to detail is unmatched. Guys, give them a call for your next set of strings, and I promise you, you will be happy. So what's your price point on this, on your saw?
So right now we've got it listed on the website for $159.99. So that's going to be our base model. And again, like you said, I was in that boat. You know, I wanted it all in one, but I didn't want to fork out the money for everything, and that's why we did it. And we're not out here to jack the price way up. You know, we want it to be affordable for your average bow hunter. You know, the guy that wants to build his own arrows and just become a better archer. So it's going to be $159.99. Now, we do have a couple upgrade options that we offer if you do want to go a little more in depth. So our base saw comes with steel bearings. Now, those are great, you know, steel bearings. But if you're maybe in a humid environment or a dusty environment, we also came out with a ceramic bearing upgrade. Now, these have dust covers on them, and they're ceramic, so they're not going to rust. This is a $14.99 upgrade. if you want ceramics. And then we also have what he was showing earlier, the knock-in rear rest. Now, it comes standard with the carbon to carbon, and that's just what I grew up cutting. I always did it, so we made it that way, and then we got that feedback. So this is the $1999 upgrade for the knock-in. And with this knock-in, you're also going to get a plug right here. We've had a lot of questions about this, so we need to make a video on this, but this upper component in the knock-in has a screw. Now you can back out this screw and put in this plug in the back, and that's going to allow you to cut carbon to carbon if you want to do so. So you have both.
Very cool.
Yeah.
No, I mean, again, you guys did a phenomenal job. Now, the reason I asked on price point, I don't want this whole podcast to be a sales pitch, but it is because it's an awesome product. The reason I ask on price point is because shops now, bow shops are struggling all across the country. That's a known fact. And so for labor work, they've had to start increasing their prices. Whereas used to, you could go in and it would be 25 cents a cut. You were out of there for $4. Now they've had to up their prices, and it's like, $1.50, $2 a cut. And then if you want your inserts glued, and I've walked out of shops before spending $60 for a dozen arrows. And I'm like, what in the heck? Where'd that go? Like, how did I just spend $60? Now, what's even worse is if you go into a shop to tune your recurve. And so you're shooting and wanting to cut an 1/8 inch, shooting and want to cut an 1/8 inch, shooting and want to cut an 1/8 inch. Let's try cutting 1/8 inch off the back. Let's try. And so you get done. They're like, all right, that's $124.99. Like, what? How? Well, you cut all day long. So, they've just, and hey, I understand that shops have to do that. They have to make a living. I understand that. It used to be where I would encourage guys to go to a shop to get their arrows built because it was just so cheap. You might have a dozen cut, fletched, wrapped and fletched, ready to go out the door for $30. Now it's just so crazy expensive that I tell people, I'm like, listen, if you do 2 dozen in a year, you've paid for a saw, you've paid for a jig, you've paid for everything you need to build your own arrows. $159.99. Are you stinking kidding me? And guys, listen, I love building arrows. And so it's nothing for guys to call me and say, hey, can you build me some arrows? Yeah, sure. Bring them over. But listen, you can make a couple extra bucks on the side and pay for the saw. Like, if it's something you enjoy doing, charge a guy, $30 to build him cut him some arrows, and you pay for the saw in a month. Yeah. Like, man, especially if I live in a small town. There's no bow shops anywhere near us. Guys call me all the time. Can you cut my arrows? Can you tie in a peep sight? Can you do this? Whatever. Now, normally I don't charge people, but again, I'm just saying if you're needing to pay for a saw, it's a great way to justify it, guys. Now, title of the episode is Building Better Arrows. So I want to talk through some tips and tricks to build some better arrows. So if they just bought this system, first off, I would have told you if you want to build better arrows, you need to buy a saw, you need to buy a square, you need to buy a spinner. You just need to go to MODSAW.com and buy all of it in one. But And let me just preference this, guys. I don't work with these guys at all. They have not paid me. They've not done anything. I just love the product. I haven't even played with it yet, but I love the product. So I would just go to MODSAW.com, buy everything you need, and it's going to be cheaper than just your saw alone anywhere else. So if you have your saw, your square, and your spinner, what are the steps that you guys take? And we'll stop and hit some tips and tricks throughout the way, but what are the steps you guys take to build the best set of arrows that you can build?
Yeah, of course. So we got an arrow here, one of my arrows. So first off, I would say it's a learning experience. It's never going to be perfect at first. So learn everything you can. There's tons of resources all across the internet. Spread out your resources. Don't listen to one individual person for everything. But obviously you're going to start with cutting your arrow. Now, one tip and one thing that we did on this saw that we actually had some people that were questioning it at first, and we should have put it out there a little better. But as you'll see on this blade right here, there's not a ton of the blade exposed. There's not a lot. Now, we did that because we want to encourage people that they should not cut the arrow all in one motion. You should not be shoving your arrow into that saw. That is going to give you splinters on your arrow. You're not going to get a straight cut. So we made this to where it's only going to cut through one wall of the arrow at a time. So as you're rolling that arrow into the blade, you're not going to cut through your entire arrow. So that's going to help, with your cuts. It's going to make cleaner cuts. And we're able to do that because our blade lasts so long. So yeah, maybe if you had a different type of blade that wore out faster, you wouldn't want this much of the blade exposed. So that was one of the things we did. And like he was saying, the mid rest, that's going to prevent any flexation when you're spinning that arrow into the blade. Because a lot of times that middle of the arrow, as you're spinning it, you'll flex it, and that's just not going to give you a square cut. So just a couple of things put together is going to give you a pretty flush cut from the start. And like I said, make sure to roll your arrow into that blade so that it is a clean cut. Now, after you cut your arrow, and again, you'll need to shoot and play around. And that's the awesome thing about having an arrow saw. What I loved about it is tuning your arrow. You can cut off, like you said, a 1/4 inch, a 1/2 inch, shoot it, see how you like it, cut off another 1/2 inch. You have that right there at your fingertips. So when you find out where your arrow is going to tune, try it with one. Then you're going to go to squaring your arrows. Now, on this front square post right here, we have 400 grit sandpaper right in here. Really cool thing that Jonathan did, genius over here. He made this a thread end piece on the back. So you can unthread this and take off that sticky sandpaper back, and it comes with 5 extra, and screw it back in and you're good to go. Now, also with that, if you're shooting a regular diameter arrow or smaller, you can actually rotate this so square an arrow, square another arrow. Now, if it's getting a little dirty, you can give this piece a 1/4 turn, and that's going to give you a new piece of the sandpaper so that you can use the most of your sandpaper without just
very cool.
It. So we recommend that you scoop this front bearing post right here all the way up, and that's going to stabilize the front end of that arrow right there. So then you'll throw the arrow on, and now with squaring, a lot of people think, you got to get into it. Well, it doesn't take a lot, so it's just a light pressure and roll into that squaring post right at the end there. Yeah. One of the things I like to do is take a Sharpie. I know a lot of people do this. Take a silver Sharpie and mark that cut end of the arrow on the face of it. And then you just want to square that Sharpie off the arrow. So you're not just squaring on it, shortening that arrow up. So once you do that, once you have all your arrows squared, good to go, you have a flush, and you want to move on to spinning your arrows. Now, when you're spinning your arrows, you want to dry fit them because you want to find where that insert fits best in that arrow and spins with the spine of the arrow. You want to find where it's going to spin best. So what we do is we'll take, like here I have a 1/2 out. I would take a 1/2 out, not glued, put it in the end of your arrow, and go ahead and give it a spin on these bearings. Now you want to notice, look over that wobble indicator and spin it. And if you have wobble, you're going to want to give that a 1/4 turn and find where that insert is going to spin best. Once you find, because you'll clear it up, and if it's not, either the cut wasn't perfect, you may need to go re-square, or that arrow could just be wobbly, and that's why we'll also say cut off each end of the arrow. If you're that, if you got a lot to cut down on an arrow, cut off each side. This gives you that availability. You've got the saw. That's going to give you the straightest part, the middle part of that arrow. Middle 28 inches normally is the straightest part of that arrow.
That's what I was going to say was, now there are guys who are just simply picky. They want all of their arrows to look the same, so they have to cut from the same end of that arrow.
Yeah.
I understand. Hunters are the most prettiest, everything's got a match and that you would ever imagine. But I was actually going to say that before you cut, I spin my arrows and figure out which side is the straightest. And so if the back has wobble in it, I'm going to cut off the back. If the front has wobble, I'm going to cut off the front. If they both have a little bit of wobble, I'm going to cut off both sides. So if I have a 32-inch overall arrow and I need a 28-inch arrow, both sides wobble, I'm going to cut off 2 inches of each side. If just the front has some wobble in it, cut the 4 inches off the front. If just the back has wobble in it, cut the 4 inches off the back. That's going to give you the straightest carbon you can have. Now, most people make incredibly straight carbon these days. I mean, if you're shooting a .001, people don't understand how straight that really, truly is. I mean, that's like a fraction of one of my hairs of straightness. So you're going to have a straight arrow. But all I'm saying is if there's any wobble in that arrow at all, cut from that side. And that's going to give you the straightest arrow. Now, all right, so you go back to dry fitting. You're spinning your dry fit. You find the best. That's where you were at. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
Where that insert's going to work with that spine. Once you find that perfect spot, then I'll take that same silver Sharpie, and you can actually, I'll probably still have it somewhere. It's faded, but I will actually draw a line from the insert onto the shaft, so then you know that's where to align that insert. And then after that, use your glue that you like and glue it in. And from there, you should be good to go.
So a couple things that I want to hit on before we move on. I would always recommend pulling your nocks out of your arrows before you glue your outserts. What's going to happen, and I'm by no means like an engineer or a scientist, but what's going to happen is that's going to create an air piston, I guess. And so when those go to glue, the air has to come out of that shaft. Well, it's still wet glue. So a lot of dudes, they glue up their inserts and then they come back and they're all just, a 1/16 of an inch pushed out. Well, that air pushed the inserts out before it dried. So if you pull your knock out before you glue your inserts in, that doesn't happen. So pull your nocks out before you glue your inserts, and that air will escape out the back and you'll get a better seated glue. Now, I will also say if you're shooting any kind of heavy hitting, if you've ever listened, we'll just say this, if you've ever listened to the hunting public, then you're going to want to use black glue, and that's a rubberized glue. So out front, if you're shooting a heavy outsert, if you're shooting an ethics outsert system, if you've got 75 grain insert, 125 grain broadhead, anything like that, use a black glue. It's a rubberized glue. The clear super glue is going to fraction and break after just repeatedly impacting that target. And people wonder why they're pulling their inserts out in their target. Well, the glue didn't necessarily fail. It's just broken over time after heavy impact.
Yeah.
Whereas that black rubberized glue, it will take the impact without breaking and fracturing, and you'll have a lot better arrows. So use black rubberized glue if you're shooting any kind of heavy outsert system, any kind of heavy broadhead, black glue. Now, another thing that I wanted to talk about was when you go to, well, never mind. We'll hit that in the next point. So once you have done all of that to your arrow, you've glued it, you've spun it. What happens? Well, what's your next step in the process of, are these arrows shooting good out of this bow?
Yeah. So, a lot of people, what they'll do is they'll bare shaft tune or they'll knock tune, to see what's going on with that arrow flight. Like I said, I'd like to do a couple of those beforehand before you go ahead and build all your arrows up. But then once you're at that point, a lot of people will knock tune their arrows to make sure that they're all correctly coming out the right way. And some arrow companies will spine align and have that set for you, but a lot of people would go that route before fletching.
Now, let me just say this: what he described in the beginning of in the middle of his arrow build, where he's turning the front of the arrow, that's not knock tuning. So many guys think if they do that, they don't have to knock tune.
Mm-hmm.
That's a complete different step. Basically, all you're doing when you're turning your tip to see where it spins the best is you're finding where that outsert or insert aligns best with that carbon. That's not knock tuning. So just because you do that step doesn't mean you don't have to knock tune. Now, on that point, that's the reason that squaring is so vitally important. People think, well, I cut my arrows, they're all going to be square. No, they're not. They're not at all. And if you think about it, how can anything that isn't sitting flush, well, first off, ever last? Because if there's any kind of, opening on one side of the arrow shaft between the carbon and the outsert, that's where it's going to break and fail. The glue between there is going to, it's just going to cause failure in that arrow shaft system. But also, if two things aren't seated perfectly flush, how are they going to fly straight? They have to be seated perfectly flush.
Mm-hmm.
All we're doing when we're turning our insert and or outsert or half out, whatever we're shooting, is we're aligning that outsert to fit best with that carbon. So yes, both are square, but there still might be a way that they align better and they sit better up against one another. So that is not the same as knock tuning. Just because you do that doesn't mean you can skip knock tuning. I've heard that before, why I squared the front and the back. That's another thing. Square the back of your arrows too. If your knock is not sitting flush, then it doesn't matter if the front is sitting flush. So square the back of your arrow and the front of your arrow. And then, knock tune, bear shaft tune. And that's where we get into. So do you do anything past bear shaft tuning?
So personally, what I like to do is, I'll do some bear shaft tuning to see where I'm at. Paper tuning, I'll shoot through some paper, make some small changes if I need to, shim the cams, or I try to stay away from moving the rest as much as possible. After that, personally, what I like to do is, I'm a big bow hunter, so I want to shoot my broadheads right then, of course, with fletchings. I'll throw a fletching on one of them, fletch it up, and I'll shoot some broadheads downrange and scoot out and see what my arrow's doing.
You'll even pair your broadheads with the exact arrow you're going to shoot.
Yeah. So I like to shoot, I'll shoot the broadhead first and then 2 field tips downrange and see where I'm hitting, and I'll make adjustments from there.
So let me just say, all of these small steps that people are listening to and thinking, you can probably get by without that. You're the reason I get phone calls saying, how come I'm shooting good at 20, but when I get past 60, they start fading off? Because you skipped a little step. Because they're flying straight enough to shoot good at 20, but then at 60, 70, 80, that's why you see them fading off. Yeah. So all of the guys that are listening and saying, well, you can probably skip that step. Those are the guys that are calling me saying, well, what's happening past 70? So I understand too. And Fred Eichler said it really well one time. We were talking about building recurve arrows. And all of these little things might add up to a single percentage of difference that it makes in the end. But if 5 or 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 things add up to be a percentage, that's a 10% difference when you're shooting.
Yep.
That's a big difference.
Yep.
And listen, this is all stuff that I myself enjoy doing. And I would hope that as a bow hunter and as somebody who cares about, this is fun stuff. This isn't like, I got to go out and tune my bow. I love tuning bows. It's so much fun. Not necessarily compounds anymore. I love tuning recurves, but it's so much fun. It's enjoyable, and it adds up in the end. I promise. That's why some guys can shoot at 110 and shoot their broadheads the same way they're shooting their field tips, and you're struggling past 50 or 60 to get your field tips to fly good, because they've taken these steps to make sure everything is perfect, to make sure everything. And listen, I promise you, if I can go back to 30 yards and I can shoot my bear shafts and I can shoot my fletched arrows and I can shoot broadheads and they're all grouping together, I can go to any distance I want and shoot those broadheads fletched, and they're going to fly fantastic. I promise, because I've done the work to make sure that bow is shooting well. Are there anything, have you guys ever found out? And I got to ask, because you've already blown my mind on your spin aligner system. What'd you call it?
Wobble indicator.
Wobble indicator. That's a super scientific name. I love it.
It's super. It took a while.
I'm the wobble, and you've already blown my mind there. So I've never thought about putting a dot on the table or anything like that. I'm the idiot that has to take 20 minutes per arrow trying to figure out if it's square or not, wobbling or not. The wobble indicator. Have you guys ever figured out any tips or tricks along the way to make the arrow building process just better?
Yeah. So, one of them, obviously the wobble indicator, that really helps me a lot just for aligning that front end of the broadhead. Of course, repetition, doing it more. I learned a lot just doing it myself. I mean, I'm just like anyone else. I started out, had no idea what I was doing. I had a buddy that was teaching me a little bit here and there, but I was clueless. And that's the thing. It can be scary, getting into it. Like, a lot goes into it, but it's not difficult. It's really not. And like you said, those things are going to add up in the long run. And if, like myself, and I'm sure many people, we care about the animals that we're shooting. I don't want to make a bad shot on an animal. So if I can prevent that, I'm going to do everything I can to make it, that I have control over, to make it work. But the wobble indicator, and I guess just time, really.
Yeah. Another thing that we did change is just being able to move everything to, get it to fit for your setup. He came to me a lot of times and he's like, man, like, I like what you did as I was designing it, but, we could make this small change and it would make my life so much easier. And so after, I don't know how many months of that, we ended up, fine tuning small little things like the stabilization legs. Whenever you're spinning your arrow, everything stays stable.
Yeah. And you learn that stuff as you go, and that's what makes you better at it. And that's what makes you build better arrows. So I would also encourage you guys, what I do, one big tip that will save trouble on bear shaft tuning, especially, and I've noticed it a lot more on recurves than I have compounds. But when you add weight to the front of your arrow, it weakens that arrow spine. When you add weight to the back of your arrow, it stiffens that arrow spine. So a lot of guys, they bear shaft tune, completely bare shaft, and they get those bare shafts flying perfect. But then when they put their wraps and their fletchings on, they've actually stiffened that spine enough to where it's now not flying good. And it causes a lot of frustration because people are like, dude, I've done everything. I squared my arrows. I spin tested each one of them. I knock tuned every one of them. I got bare shafts flying perfect. And then now they're flying like crap. Well, what's happened is you've stiffened that spine too much. So I always encourage people, once you've done all of the work that was laid out for you on the MODSAW, and you go to bare shaft tune and you go to actually shoot the arrow, weigh out your wraps and your vanes and put that amount of weight on the back of that arrow. I just use electrical tape and or a wrap. I mean, sometimes I'm like, okay, 3 wraps equal the perfect amount of my wrap and my vanes. So I'll just put 3 wraps on the back. But anyways, weigh out the electrical tape and wrap it around the back of that arrow. Say it's 47 grains for your wraps and your 3 vanes. Weigh that out and then put that electrical tape around the back of that arrow. And then when you're bare shaft tuning, you know that you've stiffened that spine the same way that the wrap and fletching will once it's a built arrow. So that has saved me a ton of frustration. And again, I notice it more on recurves than I do compounds. Because really, what is 42, 44 grains? What does that really do for you on a compound? Not a lot. With recurves being more finicky, I've noticed it more, but still, I've just made it a practice to always do that. And it causes it, and it relieves a lot of frustration in the long run. So, gentlemen, where can they find the MODSAW at?
Yeah, on our website, MODSAW.com. You can also find a lot of the videos and stuff that we made. We're on all the socials, mostly Instagram right now, but also Facebook, TikTok as well. But all of that can be found at our website. And
you guys are going to a couple more Total Archery challenges, correct? Where can they come check you out? Where are you going to be at for those?
Yeah, we'll be at Total Archery Challenge Utah. I think that's the next one coming up. We'll have a booth out there, and then as well as Kentucky, Indiana, and the Minnesota, Wisconsin, Michigan Total Archery Challenge. So we've got 3 more this year.
So if you're going to any of those, go check out the MODSAW. Go check them out online on social media. Definitely stop by the Bear booth if you're at any Total Archery Challenge. We're giving away a free recurve at every shoot. Just a fun little game. You shoot the target, and if you're in the vitals at all, you're entered to win. And that's a recurve at every shoot. You get to pick the bow. So make sure and stop by the Bear booth at that. Make sure and stop by the shooting range for the truck giveaway. Get entered to win the truck, shoot the 111-yard caribou, and get in to win the truck. Guys, I'm not a gun guy. You're listening to the Bear Archery Podcast. I'm a bow hunter. I enjoy archery. However, guns are a necessity for outdoorsmen. I need an everyday carry pistol. I need a shotgun to shoot birds with. I need a truck gun. I need a gun to shoot coyotes with. I need a lightweight gun to pack in the mountains if I'm on a bear hunt and need backup. There are times where I need a gun. And I am the type of guy, like I said, I don't study guns. I don't know a lot about guns. So when I'm in need of a gun, I just call somebody. My favorite place on earth has become Powder and String Outfitters in Wellington, Kansas. I love the creaky old floor, the rustic decor, the fact that they just take you back to a time where Main Street shops were experts in their trade. It's one of the best feelings walking into that place because you feel like you're walking back in time. Powder and String Outfitters has just launched an online website where you can shop the largest selection of in-stock guns and ammo that you will find anywhere, and the best prices guaranteed. Powderandstring.com. Guys, here's my favorite part. Call them. Ask them questions. Ask them, tell them what you're looking for in a gun, what you want to get out of it, what you want to use it for, and they're going to point you in the right direction. How do I know that? Because I have to do that every time I need a new gun. So guys, go to powderandstring.com for your next gun, for your ammo, for your clips, for all of your hunting accessories, trail cameras, tree stands. They've got it all. They've got archery equipment too, but they are my gun experts that I trust, that I go to all of the time when I've got questions about guns. Powderandstring.com. Go check them out. You can shop online. You can figure it all out. The guns will ship straight to your house. It's an incredibly easy process to go through. Guys, they've got everything you could ever need. Powderandstring.com. I would highly encourage you to check out the MODSAW and go support these guys. Support guys that are trying to better the industry. Support guys that are trying to better us as sportsmen, as outdoorsmen, as bow hunters. Go support them. Go check them out. But guys, thank you so much for listening. Y'all have a fantastic week.